Jake drove for hours, a silent, grim-faced automaton. He pushed the SUV hard, putting as much distance as possible between them and the smoking ruins of the restaurant. The world outside was a black, featureless void. Inside, the silence was a living thing, thick with the smell of smoke that clung to their clothes and the high-pitched ringing in Grace's ears. When he finally stopped, it was on a deserted stretch of road, a pull-off overlooking a valley shrouded in darkness. He cut the engine, and the sudden silence was absolute. He didn't move. He just sat there, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles were white mountains on a pale landscape. What was that? Grace's voice was a thin, trembling thread in the darkness. Who would do? It was a setup. Jake's voice was a low, rough rasp. He finally turned to look at her, and in the faint glow of the dashboard lights, she saw raw, unfiltered guilt in his eyes. A trap. And I walked you right into it. How could you have known? It's my job to know. He slammed his hand against the steering wheel, the sudden violence making her flinch. It's my literal goddamn job, Grace, and I... He cut himself off, taking a ragged, shuddering breath, fighting for a control that was clearly slipping. She had never seen him like this. Not once. Not the cool professional. Not the silent soldier. This was a man unraveling. This was a man who had failed by his own impossible standards, and it was tearing him apart. You saved me, she said softly. Again. It was almost not enough. He closed his eyes, a muscle jumping in his clenched jaw. If I'd been 5 seconds slower. But you weren't. She reached across the console, her hand tentatively covering his on the steering wheel. His skin was cold, his knuckles rigid. Jake, look at me. He opened his eyes. They were dark, haunted pools of self-recrimination. I am alive right now because you were there. My father. Her voice faltered, the image of the obliterated booth flashing in her mind. I don't know if he made it, but you got me out. You saved me. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand turned under hers, his fingers lacing with hers, a desperate anchoring grip. I made a call, he said, his voice quiet, rough. To the hospital, before we got too far out. Your father's alive. Grace let out a sob of relief so profound it felt like it was ripped from her soul. Oh, thank God. But Grace... He squeezed her hand, his touch grounding her. He was the target. The bomb was planted directly under his table. Whoever is doing this, they wanted him dead. Why? Because he knows something, or he did something. Jake paused, his gaze intense. Before the explosion, he was about to tell you something. Do you remember? Grace nodded, her mind replaying the last chaotic moments. He said the situation was more complicated, that the terrorists weren't what I thought. What do you think he meant? She looked out the window into the vast, starless darkness. A cold, terrible certainty began to crystallize in her mind, formed from the fragments of Diaz's warnings and her father's fear. I think my father did something awful, she whispered. And now, someone is making him pay for it. Jake didn't disagree. He just held her hand tighter. After a long silence, he finally got out of the car. Grace followed him, the cold night air a shock to her system. They were on a scenic overlook of some kind. The sky above was a black velvet canvas, punched through with a brilliant, breathtaking spray of stars. There were no city lights for miles, only the immense, silent beauty of the cosmos. Where are we? She asked. West Virginia, middle of nowhere. He leaned back against the hood of the SUV, his shoulders finally losing some of their tension. Figured if we have to hide, it might as well be somewhere beautiful. She stood beside him, her shoulder almost touching his, and looked up at the river of stars. It is beautiful. I used to come to places like this with my brother, he said, his voice distant, lost in memory. Before he enlisted. He said that under a sky this big, all our problems seemed small, that the universe was so vast our worries were insignificant. You miss him, she stated softly. It wasn't a question. Every day. He turned his head to look at her, his profile sharp against the starlight. But he was wrong, you know. About what? About our problems being insignificant. He shifted, turning to face her fully, his presence blocking out the rest of the world. Because the people we love, they're not insignificant. They're everything. Her heart stuttered. The air between them grew thick, heavy, charged with the weight of his words. He was looking at her with an intensity that had nothing to do with protection and everything to do with something else. Something raw and real and terrifying. I've broken every one of my rules for you, Grace. His voice was a rough, raw confession in the dark. Every single one. Her breath caught. What rules? Don't get emotionally involved. Don't care beyond the scope of the job. Don't. He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard she could see the muscle pulse. Don't fall in love. The universe stopped. The stars, the wind, the sound of her own frantic heartbeat. It all ceased to exist. There was only him and the impossible, earth-shattering words hanging in the space between them. You. She could barely form the word, her throat tight. What did you just say? He closed the distance between them in 2 short steps. His hands came up to frame her face, not with the gentle guidance of a protector, but with a desperate, controlled urgency that made her stomach plummet. His touch, from hands she knew were hard and capable of violence, was impossibly tender. I fell in love with you. The words were torn from him, a confession from the deepest, most guarded part of his soul. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was in that ice cream shop when you told me about your mother. Maybe it was when you sat with me in the dark and made me see Marcus as a hero instead of my failure. Maybe it was gradual, in every cup of coffee, every shared look, every time you trusted me when you had no reason to. He paused, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone, a simple touch that set her entire nervous system on fire. Or maybe, he continued, his voice dropping lower, becoming rougher, more intimate. It was all at once. 1 second, you were a job. The next, you were the only thing that mattered. Grace opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He was looking at her as if she were the only source of light in his dark world, and the sheer force of it stole her breath. That's against your rules, she finally managed to whisper, the words feeling flimsy and inadequate. To hell with my rules. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It wasn't tentative. It was the kiss of a man who had been starving and had just been offered a feast. It was the kiss of a drowning man finding air. It was raw and hungry and utterly consuming, a desperate attempt to erase the horrors of the day with the undeniable, breathtaking reality of her. Her back hit the cool metal of the SUV as he pressed her against it, his body a hard, warm wall against hers. Her hands flew up, tangling in the short, rough hair at the nape of his neck, pulling him closer, even though there was no space left between them. It was pure instinct, a need to answer his desperation with her own. He deepened the kiss, a low groan vibrating from his chest into hers. One of his hands slid from her face down to her waist, his fingers digging into the curve of her back, arching her against him. A sound escaped her throat, half sigh, half whimper, and she felt his body jolt in response, his muscles coiling even tighter. When they finally broke apart, gasping for air, he rested his forehead against hers. His eyes were closed, his breathing ragged. She could feel his heart hammering against her own, a wild, frantic rhythm that was the complete antithesis of the controlled man she knew. Me too, she whispered against his lips, the words a confession of her own. He opened his eyes. The blue was now a dark, stormy navy, turbulent with an emotion that made her stomach clench. You too, what? She let her hands slide from his hair to his face, her fingers tracing the hard line of his jaw, feeling the rasp of his stubble. I fell in love with you, she said, the words firm, certain, a truth she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge until this very moment. You're the first person who's ever made me feel safe. The first person who's ever made me feel seen. She paused, her thumb brushing over his lower lip, feeling it tremble slightly at her touch. And the first person, she continued, her voice dropping to an intimate whisper, who's ever made me feel this. He closed his eyes again, a tremor running through his powerful frame. It was as if her words had bypassed all his defenses and struck something vital, something he had kept locked away for a lifetime. This makes everything more complicated, he rasped, but he didn't pull away. If anything, his arm tightened around her waist. I know. He opened his eyes, and they were wild now, possessive, uncontrolled. Because now, he growled, his voice rough with a dangerous edge, now I'll do anything to keep you alive. Anything. And that makes me dangerous, Grace. More dangerous than anyone else out there. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold night air traced its way down her spine. Dangerous to who? To anyone who tries to hurt you, he murmured, his lips brushing against the corner of her mouth, then trailing down the sensitive line of her jaw. To anyone who gets in our way. Jake. His name was a plea, though she wasn't sure what she was pleading for. More, probably. Tell me to stop, he whispered against her skin, his breath hot and intoxicating. Tell me this is crazy, that it's wrong, that you need a bodyguard, not a man who can barely control himself around you. She tangled her hands in his hair again, tilting his head back, forcing him to look at her. I'm not going to say any of that. A fire blazed in his eyes. He kissed her again, slower this time, deeper, a kiss that was less about desperation and more about claiming. And Grace, for the first time in her life, wasn't being protected. She was being wanted. The difference was devastating. The shrill ring of his phone was a violent intrusion. He ignored it. It rang again, insistent. With a low curse, he pulled back, his eyes still locked on hers, and answered. His expression hardened instantly. When? A pause. Are you sure? A longer pause. Understood. He hung up, and when he looked at her, the soldier was back. But there was a new, terrifying emotion lurking beneath the surface. Fear. Not for himself. For her. Your father woke up, he said, his voice tight. He's asking for me. Me alone. About what? He wouldn't say. But. Jake hesitated. He said if anything happens to him, there's something I need to know. About who's really behind the attacks. Grace's stomach plummeted. Are you going? I have to. Then I'm going with you. No. He gripped her shoulders, his hold firm, absolute. You stay hidden, where I know you're safe. Jake. Grace, please. The plea in his voice undid her. I just told you I'm in love with you. Don't make me walk you back into the fire. She wanted to argue. She wanted to scream that she wouldn't be left behind. But she saw the truth in his eyes, the desperate need to keep her safe, a need that now went far beyond duty. Okay, she whispered. But you come back to me. His eyes softened, a silent, solemn vow passing between them. Always. Jake left her in the dingy motel room with a man named Torres, a former Delta Force operator whose face looked like it had been carved from granite and whose eyes held a quiet, lethal competence. Jake's orders had been simple and absolute. Shoot anyone who isn't me. Then he was gone, melting back into the darkness, leaving Grace with a ghost of his kiss on her lips and a cold knot of dread in her stomach. The 3-hour drive to the hospital was a blur of highway lights and churning thoughts. Jake's mind was a battlefield. The confession under the stars had changed everything. Grace was no longer a mission objective. She was the mission. The distinction was critical. It made him sharper, more focused, but also infinitely more vulnerable. The thought of losing her was a physical pain, a gaping wound he knew he wouldn't survive. The hospital was a fortress of quiet efficiency and hushed whispers. Jake used the senator's name and his own formidable presence to bypass security, his gaze sweeping every corridor, assessing every person as a potential threat. He found Senator Miller in a private room in the ICU. Half his face was swathed in white bandages, his left arm was in a sling, and a web of tubes and wires connected him to a bank of silently beeping machines. But his eyes were open, and they were lucid. Jake. His voice was a dry, painful rasp. Where is she? Where's Grace? She's safe. Jake pulled a chair to the bedside, positioning himself with his back to the wall, his eyes on the door. That's all you need to know. You said you had something to tell me. Miller looked down at his bandaged hands, the gesture full of a weary shame. First, I need you to promise me something. I don't make promises until I know what I'm promising. Fair enough. The senator took a shallow, rattling breath. Then I'll just ask, no matter what I tell you, no matter how monstrous it is, you protect my daughter. She's innocent in all of this. Jake felt his gut tighten. Innocent in what, Senator? Miller closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a path through the soot on his unbandaged cheek. In my sins. And then, the story came pouring out. A torrent of ambition, desperation, and catastrophic miscalculation. 2 years ago, Senator George Miller's political career was dying. His poll numbers were in a free fall. Whispers of campaign finance scandals and insider trading were growing into a roar in the press. His once certain re-election was slipping through his fingers. That's when Vincent Keller had appeared, materializing like a devil in a bespoke suit. He introduced himself as a security consultant, a specialist in crisis management and public perception. His proposal was as simple as it was diabolical. Create a series of controlled theatrical terrorist threats. No real danger, no casualties, just enough smoke and mirrors to generate headlines. He showed me a full prospectus, Miller rasped, his voice trembling with the memory. Bomb threats on empty buildings, cyber attacks that would be thwarted at the last minute. It was all designed to create a crisis that I, and only I, could solve. Nausea rose in Jake's throat. And you agreed. I was desperate. Miller's eyes, pleading and pathetic, met Jake's. My legacy, 20 years of public service, was turning to ash. I thought if I could position myself as the strong leader, the man who kept the city safe. He trailed off, the shame too heavy for words. I would be a hero. I would win. But they went off script, Jake stated, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Miller nodded, a fresh wave of pain washing over his face. At first it worked perfectly. The first 3 incidents were flawless. Empty threats, public reassurance from me. My approval rating shot up 15 points. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. So I signed the real contract. What contract? Keller's final payment wasn't money. It was legislation. A sweeping private security bill that would funnel billions in federal protection contracts to a preferred list of vendors. Miller's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know it at the time, but the primary beneficiary, the company that would get the lion's share, was owned by a shell corporation that traced back to Keller. You sold your office for political survival. I didn't know how far he would go. Miller's voice rose, cracking with pain and denial. I thought they were just political operators, playing a dirty game, but a game nonetheless. Jake stood up, pacing the small room, the contained energy in his body needing an outlet. When did you realize? When the game changed. Miller winced, shifting in the bed. After I gave him my word on the bill, the incidents escalated. A car bomb in a parking garage. It was empty, but the explosion was real. A credible threat that shut down a federal building for a day. And then, the university. Jake finished, his voice cold as ice. Miller nodded, his eyes filling with tears again. He didn't tell me. I woke up and saw it on the news. An explosion 200 yards from the library where Grace was studying. 17 people injured. His voice broke completely. My daughter, Jake, my own daughter, was almost killed by the fire I started. Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. What did you do? I panicked. I called Keller. Told him it was over, that he was insane. I cut off the payments. I severed all contact. I thought if I just stopped, he would go away. But he didn't. No, because I made another mistake. Miller took a ragged breath. In my fear, I leaked information to an FBI contact, the names of 2 of Keller's low-level guys. I thought if the feds arrested a few of his people, he'd get the message. He'd see I was too dangerous to push. The final fatal piece fell into place. You didn't make yourself dangerous, Jake said, turning to face him. You made yourself a liability. Exactly. Miller closed his eyes. I was no longer a client in breach of contract. I was a witness. I knew the whole scheme. I had records of the transactions, and witnesses, he whispered, have to be silenced. That's when the real attack started, on you and on Grace. Yes, he'd use her to control me, to keep me from talking. And then he'd kill us both anyway. No loose ends. Jake's mind raced. Diaz. He must have found out. Miller looked genuinely surprised. Diaz was warning her? Yes, and he was executed for it. The senator seemed to shrink into the bed, the weight of another death settling on his shoulders. He must have been investigating on his own. He had access to everything. He found the truth, Jake finished grimly. Do you have proof? Anything that ties Keller to this? I have everything, Miller rasped. Recordings of our meetings, encrypted emails, bank transfers. It's all in a digital vault. The password? With my lawyer, Thomas Brennan, K Street. Miller was fading, his voice growing weaker. If anything happens to me, he has instructions to release everything to the FBI. Jake moved closer to the bed. And when this comes out, I go to prison, Miller said simply, a strange peace settling on his face. As I should. Conspiracy, corruption. I'll get 20 years, maybe more. And Grace? Grace. His voice broke. Grace will have the truth. She'll know what kind of man her father really is. And she'll finally be free of me. The heart monitor beside the bed began to beep, the rhythm faltering, slowing. Jake's eyes snapped from the screen to Miller's face. The senator was pale, his skin turning a waxy, translucent color. Senator? Miller's hand shot out, grabbing Jake's wrist with surprising strength. Thomas Brennan, he repeated, his words urgent, slurring. Get the evidence. Expose him. But Grace, keep her safe until it's over. Senator, promise me. His eyes were wide, desperate. Promise me you'll protect her. Not as a job. As if she's your own life. Jake thought of her face, her laugh, the feel of her in his arms. She already was. I promise. A flicker of relief passed over Miller's face. His grip loosened, his eyes starting to flutter shut. Tell Grace. His voice was a thread of sound. Tell her I'm sorry. For her mother. For the childhood I stole. For all of it. Tell her. The only good thing I ever did was her. You'll tell her yourself, Jake insisted, his thumb fumbling for the nurse's call button. Senator, stay with me. But Miller's eyes were closed. His chest gave one last, shallow rise. And then he was still. The room exploded into a controlled chaos of nurses and doctors. Jake was pushed back, out into the sterile hallway, the sounds of urgent commands and the flat continuous tone of the heart monitor echoing behind him. All he could think was, how do I tell her? How do I tell her the father she's mourning is the monster who created this nightmare? He was turning to leave, his mind already calculating his next move, when his phone vibrated. It was Torres. Carrington, we have a problem. Jake's blood ran cold. What? She's gone. Grace is gone. I was doing a perimeter check, 5 minutes max, and when I came back, Torres's voice was tight with professional fury. The door was kicked in, signs of a struggle. And this, Jake heard the crackle of paper over the phone. If you want to see her alive again, come alone. The North Harbor warehouse, 1 hour. Bring the evidence from Brennan, or she dies. Torres paused. It's signed with a K. Keller. How long ago? Jake's voice was deadly calm. 15, maybe 20 minutes. Mobilize the team, but you maintain distance. If they see anyone but me, they kill her. I know. Torres hesitated. Jake, this is a textbook trap. I know. Jake was already running, his feet pounding against the polished hospital floor. But I don't have a choice. Because it was Grace, and he had made a promise. Grace woke to the taste of blood in her mouth. It wasn't much, just a metallic tang on her tongue, but it was enough to know that someone had hit her. Her vision swam, a blurry, nauseating mess. A dull, relentless pain throbbed behind her eyes, pulsing in time with her frantic heartbeat. She tried to move her hands, to touch the back of her head where the pain was sharpest, and was met with the cold, unforgiving bite of metal digging into her wrists. Handcuffs. The memory slammed back into her in jagged, violent shards. Torres, his face grim, leaving to check the perimeter. The explosive crack of the motel room door splintering inward. Two figures, dark and swift, moving too fast for her to even scream. The desperate, futile lunge for her phone. And then a blinding starburst of pain at the base of her skull as something hard and implacable connected. Darkness. She forced her eyes to focus, blinking away the haze. A warehouse. The ceiling was lost in high, oppressive shadows. The walls were corrugated metal, weeping long, rust-colored tears. The air was thick with the cloying smell of old oil and the briny tang of the sea. She was near the harbor, and seated in front of her, as casually as if he were in a boardroom, was a man she had never seen before. He was in his late 30s, his dark hair slicked back from a handsome face that was all sharp angles and predatory stillness. He wore a Tom Ford tuxedo that was so exquisitely tailored, so absurdly out of place in the grimy warehouse, that it seemed like a statement of power in itself. "Ah, you're awake," he smiled. The smile was a masterpiece of cosmetic dentistry, all perfect, white teeth, and absolutely no warmth. "Perfect. We were waiting for you, Miss Miller." Grace's throat felt like it was lined with sand. She swallowed, the motion agonizing, and forced the words out, her voice a dry, scratchy whisper. Who are you?" Straight to the point. I respect that. He rose from his chair with the fluid, unhurried grace of a man completely in control of his universe. "My name is Vincent Keller, though I doubt your father mentioned me. George prefers to keep his business transactions discreet." The name struck her like a physical blow. Keller. The K from the note Jake had found, the source of all this. "You're the man who—" She trailed off, her mind racing. "You're behind the attacks." "I am a businessman, Miss Miller." Keller began to circle her, his expensive shoes making soft, deliberate sounds on the gritty concrete floor. He moved like a shark, smooth and menacing. "I provided a service. Your father agreed to pay for that service. And then your father decided he no longer liked the terms and attempted to, how shall I put this, remove me from the equation." He stopped directly in front of her, leaning in so their faces were only inches apart. His cologne was subtle, expensive, and smelled of sandalwood and something cold, like money. "Your father betrayed me. He cut my payments. He tried to have me arrested." A surge of pure, hot rage momentarily burned through her fear. "You put a bomb near my university. 17 people were injured. And you were not one of them," he countered, straightening up, his tone dismissive. "You should be thanking me. I could have had you killed that day. But I did not. Because unlike your father, I am a man who honors the strategic value of his assets." He returned to his chair, crossing his legs with an air of bored arrogance. "But now, we have a problem. Your father owes me a great deal of money. $4 billion to be precise." Grace blinked. The number was so astronomical, so absurd, she was certain she had misheard. "What?" "4 billion." Keller enunciated each syllable with cold, relishing precision. The estimated value of the government contracts my company would have received upon the passage of Corporate Security Act X-17. A law your father gave me his solemn word he would push through. A law that will now never see the light of day because your father broke our deal. A hysterical bubble of laughter rose in Grace's throat. It was a wild, unhinged sound that felt completely alien coming from her. You're... She tried to choke it back, but it kept spilling out. You're insane. Completely and utterly insane. Keller's eyes narrowed, the first real crack in his polished veneer. Is something amusing, Miss Miller? $4 billion. She gasped, the laughter finally dying, replaced by a staggering disbelief. Where on earth do you think my father is going to get $4 billion? He's a United States senator, not an oil baron. He doesn't have that kind of money, not even a fraction of it. He will find a way, Miss Miller. How? She shot back, leaning forward as far as the restraints would allow. Do you think he can just go to a bank and make a withdrawal? That he can liquidate assets he doesn't have? That the FBI and every financial regulatory body on the planet won't notice? Keller watched her, his head tilted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been curiosity in his cold eyes. Those, he said finally, are his problems, not mine. He will find a way, or... He let the word hang in the air between them, a gleaming, sharpened blade. Or what? Grace whispered, the last of her defiance draining away, replaced by a cold, creeping dread. Or you die, he said with a casual shrug, as if discussing the weather. Slowly, painfully, and I will make your father watch every second of it before I kill him too. The matter-of-fact cruelty of it stole the air from her lungs. This wasn't a threat. It was a ledger entry, a cost of doing business. You're serious, she breathed, completely. He glanced at his wrist, at a watch she vaguely recognized as a Patek Philippe Sky Moon Tourbillon. It was a timepiece worth more than most people's houses. In that instant, she knew. A man who wore a watch like that did not tolerate being crossed. He did not accept losses. Your father has 72 hours to arrange the transfer. After that, he made a vague, dismissive gesture with his hand. Well, I believe you understand. He can't do it, she said, her voice flat with a terrible certainty. Not in 72 hours. Not in 72 years. Then you had better hope he is far more creative than you give him credit for. Keller stood, smoothing the lapels of his immaculate tuxedo. He walked toward the massive, sliding door of the warehouse, then paused, turning back to look at her. Ah, and about your SEAL boyfriend. A cruel, knowing smile spread across his face. He will be receiving an address shortly. An invitation to a trade. The evidence your father's lawyer is holding, in exchange for you. His smile widened. It should be quite the reunion. The hope that flared in her chest was instantly extinguished by the venom in his tone. He is to come alone, of course, Keller continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial purr. Because if I see so much as a police cruiser, or one of his little soldier friends, well... He raised a finger to his own temple, mimicking a gun. Bang. He chuckled, a low, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous space. Then he turned and walked out, his footsteps fading into the night. Grace was left alone in the chilling silence, with two masked, silent guards lurking in the shadows, and the crushing, suffocating weight of the truth. Jake was coming, and Keller had absolutely no intention of letting either of them walk out of here alive. Jake didn't feel fear. Fear was a luxury, an emotion for men with something left to lose. As he drove through the sleeping city toward the industrial wasteland of the North Harbor, all that remained in him was a single, crystalline point of focus. Grace. The world had simplified, boiled down to a brutal binary equation, her and everything else. His past, his pain, the ghost of Marcus, his own life, it was all just noise. He would burn the world to the ground to bring her back. The warehouse loomed out of the darkness, a rust-eaten metal box, isolated and bleak. A perfect place for an execution. He killed the engine 200 yards out, the silence of the night rushing in, thick with the smell of salt and decay. He wasn't carrying the evidence Brennan held. That was a fool's errand. The moment the senator died, a dead man's switch had been triggered, delivering everything the FBI needed to burn Keller's empire to the ground. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a recovery. Instead of a hard drive, Jake carried a different kind of currency. A K-bar combat knife was strapped to his ankle. His Sig Sauer P226 was tucked at the small of his back, its weight a familiar, comforting pressure. And the promise he had made to Grace was a hot, living coal in his chest. He moved through the labyrinth of shipping containers like a phantom, his boots making no sound on the broken asphalt. Torres and the tactical team were 5 minutes out, a lifetime away. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, a one-way ticket. He didn't care. This was his fight. A corroded side door groaned under his hand. He slipped inside, his senses exploding, his eyes adjusting instantly to the gloom. The scene was exactly as he'd pictured it. A terrible tableau from 100 nightmares. A single, harsh spotlight beat down from the high, shadowed ceiling, pinning Grace in a circle of light. She was bound to a chair, her head bowed, but she was conscious. Alive. Two guards, clad in black tactical gear and masks, flanked the illuminated circle, their rifles held at a low ready. And in the center of it all, seated casually on another chair, as if awaiting the start of a play, was Vincent Keller. "Jake Carrington," Keller said, his voice smooth and amplified in the cavernous space. "Punctual. I do appreciate professionalism." Jake didn't answer. His entire world narrowed to the woman in the chair. He saw the bruise on her cheek, the faint smear of dried blood on her lip. A cold, silent rage, more potent than any hot fury, settled deep in his bones. Her head lifted, and her eyes found his across the space. He saw fear in them, yes, but beneath it, something else. A spark of defiance, a flicker of trust. "You came." "The evidence?" Keller asked, rising from his chair with that same fluid, predatory grace. "Where it belongs," Jake said, his voice a low, flat growl that carried across the distance. "With the FBI. Your game is over, Keller." Keller laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that grated on Jake's nerves. "You think this is a game? This is business. And you, my friend, have just made a very, very costly error in judgment." He gestured grandly toward Grace. "She was my leverage, my insurance policy. Now she's simply compensation." "Let her go," Jake said, taking a single, deliberate step into the light. "Your fight is with the senator, with me. She's not a part of this." "She is the entire part of this." Keller's voice cracked, the polished veneer fracturing to reveal the rabid animal beneath. "She's the only thing her father ever cared about. And now, from the look on your face, she's the only thing you care about. That doesn't make her irrelevant. It makes her the most valuable piece on the board." In a flash, Keller drew a pistol, not at Jake. He pressed the muzzle to Grace's temple. Jake's heart stopped. The world went silent. He could feel his own blood pounding in his ears. "So," Keller sneered, his composure returning, enjoying the absolute power of the moment. "Here is the new offer. You will get on your knees. You will place your weapon on the floor. You will kick it over to me. And in return, perhaps I will let her live long enough to watch you die." "No, Jake, don't!" Grace's voice was a desperate cry. "It's a trap!" He didn't look at her. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on Keller, his mind a supercomputer processing a million variables. The distance to Keller, 25 feet. The guard on the right. His stance was too wide, his balance slightly off. The guard on the left. His finger was resting on the trigger guard, not the trigger. Overconfident. Keller's eyes. They were focused on Jake, but a flicker of them kept darting toward the shadows, expecting backup. Slowly, deliberately, Jake lowered himself to his knees, the rough concrete biting into his jeans. The act of submission was a physical poison, a violation of every instinct. He raised his hands, showing they were empty. "The gun, Carrington." With a movement that felt agonizingly slow, He reached behind his back, drew the Sig Sauer, and placed it on the floor in front of him. The metal felt cold, dead. Kick it. He slid it across the gritty floor. It spun, coming to a stop a few feet from Keller's immaculate shoes. "Good boy," Keller mocked, a triumphant smirk spreading across his face. For a single fatal second, his eyes, and the eyes of his guards, flickered down to the weapon on the floor. It was all Jake needed. He didn't move up. He moved down. He exploded sideways, a blur of motion, his hand flashing to his ankle. The K-bar was in his hand before the first guard had even registered the movement. The guard on the right started to raise his rifle, his reaction a fraction too slow. Jake's arm snapped forward. The knife flew, a silent silver streak in the dim light. It buried itself to the hilt in the soft spot of the guard's throat. He made a wet, gurgling sound and crumpled to the floor. The second guard opened fire, the roar of the automatic weapon deafening in the enclosed space. But Jake was already a ghost. He dove behind a stack of massive wooden crates as a hail of bullets chewed through the air, splintering wood and ricocheting off the concrete floor. "Kill him!" Keller screamed, his voice high with rage and panic. He grabbed Grace's chair, dragging her back, using her as a human shield as he retreated behind a thick concrete support pillar. The warehouse became a shooting gallery. The remaining guards sprayed bullets wildly, methodically destroying Jake's cover. Jake stayed low, his breathing steady, his world narrowed to the rhythm of the gunfire. Burst of 5. Pause. Burst of 4. Pause. He was counting. Waiting. The firing stopped. The distinct metallic click of an empty magazine being ejected. Jake erupted from behind the shredded crates. He didn't run toward the guard. He ran parallel, using the shadows, closing the distance to the pillar where Keller was hiding. The guard, fumbling with a new magazine, looked up, his eyes wide with surprise. It was the last thing he saw. Jake hit him like a freight train, a full-body tackle that drove the man backward. The guard's head connected with a steel support beam with a sickening, hollow thud. He slid to the floor, unconscious. Silence descended. A heavy, ringing silence, broken only by Grace's ragged breathing. Now it was just them. "Stay back, Carrington," Keller yelled from behind the pillar. His voice was strained, the bravado gone, replaced by raw panic. "I swear to God I'll kill her. One more step and I'll put a bullet in her head." Jake stopped, 20 feet away. He raised his hand slowly, palms open. "It's over, Keller. There's nowhere to go. There's always a way out." And then Grace, her face pale with terror, but her eyes blazing with a fire Jake had never seen, did the impossible. She looked at Jake, a silent message passing between them. Then, with every ounce of strength she possessed, she threw her head backward, smashing her skull into Keller's face. There was a wet, crunching sound. Keller screamed, a high-pitched shriek of pain and rage, stumbling back a step, his grip on her chair faltering for a single, precious second. It was the only opening Jake would get. He didn't run at Keller. He dove, his body low to the ground, toward his own gun, the Sig Sauer still lying forgotten on the floor. His fingers closed around the familiar grip. He rolled, coming up on one knee, the gun raised, sighting down the barrel, all in one seamless, fluid motion that was as natural to him as breathing. Keller, blood pouring from what was clearly a broken nose, recovered his balance and raised his own pistol, aiming it wildly at Grace. Jake's shot was a deafening roar in the silence. The bullet didn't hit Keller's chest. It didn't hit his head. It hit his hand. The pistol flew from his shattered fingers, and he howled, a raw animal sound of pure agony, clutching his ruined hand to his chest. Jake was on him in an instant, the hot muzzle of the Sig Sauer pressed hard under Keller's chin, forcing his head back. "I should kill you," Jake snarled, his voice a low, guttural sound of pure, condensed fury. "Then do it," Keller spat, blood and saliva dribbling from his lips. "You don't have the guts." Jake looked into Keller's hate-filled eyes. He felt the tremor in his own hand, the primal urge to pull the trigger, to end this, to erase the man who had hurt her. Then his gaze shifted, finding Grace. She was watching him, her face pale and tear-streaked, but her eyes were steady. She gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. No. He took a deep, shuddering breath. The red haze of rage receded, replaced by the memory of his promise. He was a protector, not a murderer. He lowered the gun, and with a cold, precise fury, he drove his fist into Keller's jaw, snapping his head back. Keller's eyes rolled up, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious. Jake didn't spare him a second glance. He ran to Grace, his knife a blur as he sliced through the thick zip ties binding her wrists. The moment her hands were free, she launched herself out of the chair and into his arms, her body shaking with violent, uncontrollable tremors. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her tight against his chest, burying his face in her hair, inhaling the scent of her, the scent of life. "It's over," he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't begin to name. "It's okay. I've got you." She was sobbing against his chest, her fingers digging into the fabric of his jacket as if she could physically anchor herself to him. I thought you were going to die." "Never," he murmured, his arms a steel cage around her, holding her together, holding himself together. "I'm never leaving you." And as the first wail of approaching sirens finally reached them, cutting through the night, Jake held on to Grace, the only mission that had ever truly mattered, finally safe in his arms. In the circle of Jake's arms, the chaotic world finally stopped spinning. The sharp, metallic scent of gunpowder and the damp, decaying smell of the warehouse faded, replaced by the grounding, familiar scent of him. Leather, soap, and something uniquely, reassuringly, Jake. Her ragged sobs were the only sound in the vast, silent space as he held her, not like a fragile object to be protected, but like a fellow survivor, a partner in the war they had just won. The moment of quiet reprieve was shattered by the thunder of heavy boots and the sharp, barked commands of men with guns. Red and blue lights strobed through the warehouse's grimy windows, painting the scene in frantic, flashing colors. Torres and a full FBI tactical team swarmed the building, weapons raised, only to find a scene of anticlimactic resolution. Jake holding a trembling Grace, Keller unconscious on the floor, and his men either dead or incapacitated. Torres was the first to reach them, his rifle lowering as he took in the scene. His face was a mask of professional relief. "Carrington, Miller, are you all right?" "We're fine," Jake answered, his voice rough, his arms never loosening their hold on Grace. "Keller's alive. He's all yours." FBI agents moved with grim efficiency, cuffing a groaning Keller and his men. Paramedics rushed toward them. Jake waved them off for himself but gestured firmly toward Grace. As a young, kind-faced medic gently cleaned the cut on her lip and checked her vitals, Jake watched the gears of justice finally, clumsily, begin to turn. He saw Thomas Brennan, the senator's lawyer, already there, handing a slim hard drive to a senior agent. The dead man's switch had worked. When the paramedics finished, Jake walked to Grace and draped a thermal blanket over her shoulders. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a profound, bone-deep exhaustion that seemed to settle in her eyes. "It's over," Jake said again, his voice softer now as he brushed a stray, dust-caked strand of hair from her face. "For real this time. I'm taking you home." Grace looked up at him, and he saw a new, hard-won maturity in her gaze. "Home?" she repeated, the words sounding foreign on her tongue. "I don't have a home. The mansion was never a home. It was a cage." She took a deep breath of the cold night air. "Before we go, anywhere, there's somewhere I need to go first." Jake knew the answer before she said it. "Where?" "The hospital," she said, her voice steady, though her eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I need to see my father." The silence in the SUV on the way to the hospital was as thick as fog. Grace stared out the window, the city lights blurring into streaks of gold and white. But Jake knew she wasn't seeing them. She was processing, trying to assemble a puzzle with pieces that refused to fit. Finally, she turned to him, her brow furrowed in confusion. "Jake, at the warehouse, Keller said my father betrayed him, that he promised to sign some law, and then backed out." She paused, her fingers twisting nervously in her lap. "That doesn't make any sense. My father, He wouldn't work with someone like Keller. Would he? Jake felt his stomach clench. He had known this moment was coming. He had prayed it wouldn't be him, that she would be spared this final, cruel truth. But there was no one else. There was no more hiding. He pulled the car over to the side of the road, the engine idling. He couldn't do this while driving. She deserved his full attention. She deserved to see his eyes when he shattered the last of her illusions. He turned to face her. "Grace," he began, but the words caught in his throat. How do you tell someone the person who was supposed to be their ultimate protector was the architect of their terror? "Jake, you're scaring me." Her eyes widened, fear creeping back in. "What is it? Why did we stop?" "Because you need to hear this, and you need to hear it from me." He took her hands. They were small and cold in his. "When I went to the hospital, before you were taken, your father told me everything." She went very still. "Everything about what?" He took a breath, steeling himself. 2 years ago, your father's career was falling apart. He was desperate. He laid out the ugly truth, piece by painful piece. The deal with Keller, the staged terrorist threats, the plan to emerge as a hero from a crisis of his own making. Grace listened, her face a pale, unreadable mask. "So you're saying, my father hired Keller to fake attacks?" "Yes." But the first few, no one was hurt," she reasoned, her mind desperately trying to find a version of the story where her father wasn't a monster. "So maybe that's all it was, just theater." Jake squeezed her hands, anchoring her for the final blow. "It was, until Keller demanded a bigger payment, not money, a law, legislation that would make him billions." He watched the understanding and the horror dawn in her eyes. "Your father agreed, Grace. He made the deal." She snatched her hands back as if she'd been burned. "No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't sell out his office, his country, for—" "He did it out of pride," Jake said, his voice gentle but firm. "Out of a desperate fear of failure. He thought he was just playing a dirty political game." He didn't have to say the rest. He saw the moment the puzzle pieces clicked into place in her mind. The university bombing, her near death. It wasn't an accident. It was Keller raising the stakes, showing the senator what real terror looked like. "My father tried to stop it," Jake continued softly. "He cut Keller off. He even tried to leak information to the FBI. He thought he was protecting himself, but all he did was make himself a liability, a witness who knew too much." "So Keller came after him," she whispered, her voice hollow. "And after me." "Yes, to control him." Jake reached for her again, cupping her face in his hands. "But Grace, listen to me. He may have started this fire, but when he realized you were going to get burned, he did everything he could to put it out. He hired me. He saved the evidence. He was ready to go to prison to ensure Keller was stopped and you were safe. He put me in danger in the first place." The denial shattered, replaced by a wave of pure, hot rage. "He made a deal with a monster for political gain." "I know. Diaz is dead because of him." The tears finally came, hot and furious. "Ryan Diaz has an 8-year-old daughter and he's dead because he tried to protect me from my own father." "I know," Jake repeated, his voice a low, aching murmur. "All this time?" Her voice broke, the rage collapsing into a sob of pure, unadulterated grief. "All of it. It was his fault." Jake pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, her body racked with sobs that seemed to tear through her. He held her tightly, his hand cradling the back of her head, simply absorbing her pain, her anger, her betrayal. He let her cry until the storm passed, leaving behind a quiet, desolate emptiness. "He asked me to tell you something," Jake said finally, his voice thick with emotion. He said, "Tell Grace I'm sorry. For her mother, for the childhood I stole, for the dangers I created. Tell her, the only good thing I ever did was her." A new wave of sobs shook her, but these were different, softer, aching with the complexity of loving a man who was both her father and her destroyer. They sat in the silent car as the first light of dawn began to paint the sky. Finally, she pulled away, wiping her face with the back of her hand. "I still want to go," she said, her voice raw but steady. "To the hospital. I need to say goodbye." Jake nodded, his heart aching for her. He started the engine. As they pulled back onto the highway, she looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed but clear. "Thank you, Jake," she said quietly, "for telling me the truth, for not trying to protect me from it." A sad, wise smile touched her lips. "I think I've spent my whole life being shielded. It's time I started facing things head-on." He took her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "Then we'll face them together." And as they drove toward the hospital, toward the final painful act of a family tragedy, Grace held onto Jake's hand as if it were the only real thing left in a world that had been built on lies. Because it was. The hospital lobby was a place of hushed, sterile reverence. A grim-faced administrator and a senior FBI agent met them at the entrance. The solemn, practiced pity in their eyes told Grace everything she needed to know before a single word was spoken. "Miss Miller," the agent began, his voice low and respectful. "I'm so sorry." Grace didn't cry. She didn't collapse. A strange, hollow calm settled over her. She simply nodded, a quiet, weary acceptance. Her eyes found Jake's, and in her gaze was a silent question. "You knew?" He didn't have to answer. He just squeezed her hand, a firm, steady pressure that said, "I'm here. I've got you." They let her see him. The room was cold, the air scrubbed clean of life. Senator George Miller lay still under a crisp white sheet, the turbulent lines of his face finally smoothed into a semblance of peace. Jake waited by the door, a silent, unobtrusive guardian, giving her the space she needed for this final, complicated goodbye. Grace stood beside the bed and looked at her father's face. She saw the man who had taught her to ride a bike, the man who had held her hand on the way to her first day of school. She saw the ambitious politician who had sacrificed his family for his career. She saw the desperate man who had made a deal with a devil. And she saw the father who, in the end, had tried to do the right thing, even at the cost of his own life. They were all the same man. She reached out and touched his cold hand. "I forgive you, Dad," she whispered, the words a release, a letting go. "I know you made mistakes, terrible mistakes, but I know you loved me. In your own broken way, you loved me." Tears finally traced a path down her cheeks, not of anger or betrayal, but of a deep, sorrowful understanding. "Thank you for the Saturday ice cream," she added, a small, sad smile touching her lips. She cried then. She cried for the little girl who had lost her father long before he died. She cried for the man he could have been. And she cried for the simple, uncomplicated love that had been buried under the weight of ambition and lies. When she finally turned away from the bed, a sense of finality settled over her. It was the closing of a book, the end of a long, painful chapter. They walked out of the hospital and into the dawn. The sun was just beginning to crest the horizon, painting the sky in soft, hopeful shades of pink and gold. It was the first sunrise of the rest of her life. "So," she said, her voice quiet in the cool morning air. "What happens now?" Jake turned to face her. The gentle morning light softened the hard lines of his face, revealing the man behind the soldier, the protector, the ghost. "Now," he said, his voice low and steady, "you choose." He took her hand, his thumb stroking the back of it. "You told me once to choose something that made me happy, something that wasn't a mission or redemption." His eyes, so often guarded and cold, were now open, warm, and filled with a love that was as vast and steady as the morning sky. "I choose you, Grace." A real smile, bright and genuine, spread across her face, chasing away the last of the shadows. "I choose you too, Jake Carrington," she whispered. "Then where are we going?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing on his own lips. Anywhere you want. The whole world is yours now. Grace thought for a moment. She thought of the cold, empty mansion, the isolated cabin, the anonymous motel rooms. She realized that home had never been a place for her. It had always been a feeling she was chasing, a feeling of safety, of being seen, of being loved. She stood on her toes and kissed him. It was a soft, gentle kiss, not of desperation or fear, but of quiet certainty and endless promise. It tasted like a new beginning. "Take me home, Jake," she said against his lips. This time, the word didn't feel strange or foreign. It felt right. Home wasn't a place on a map. It was him. And as they walked away from the hospital, hand in hand, into the light of the rising sun, they weren't running from anything anymore. For the first time, they were simply walking toward everything.